Greetings and salutations and happy new year, friends! So I'm going to be the good old booktuber and I'm going to jump on the trend of ranking and rating and reviewing every single book that I read in 2021. I technically did hit my Goodreads reading goal. It was 30 novels, but it was quite low because last year I didn't read that much and I wish I read more this year. I feel like I could have, but I was in a reading slump for about 80% of the year, so that was very fun. So I didn't go super far past reading goal of 30 novels, but it's fine. I'm going to review them all anyway. So I'm going to review every novel and graphic novel that I read this year. I'm not going to do single issue comics or novellas or anything. I didn't count those, didn't record that I read them down. We're just doing novels and graphic novels. I have done a little tier list, so we're going to go from the bottom tier up to the top. The tiers are from bottom to the top. I would rather burn my eyes out than reread this. It's alright, but it's not for me. It's just alright. Show-stopping spectacular, and changed the trajectory of my life forever, which is the highest one. So, beginning with, I would rather burn my eyes out than reread these books. We only have 3 books in this category, but they are Glee the Beginning, Glee Foreign Exchange, and Glee Summer Break. I did videos on these, so if you want to know my thoughts, you can watch that video, but they're fucking awful. Oh my god, I wish I could get back the time that I spent reading these. Jesus Christ. Now on to It's Alright, But It's Not For Me. We have Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, which I was really, really excited for, and I think a lot of people love this book and I can absolutely see why. It is just not really for me. I loved the premise of it, but it is a romance book, and when I read romance books, I have a very specific kind of thing that I want out of them, and I have very specific tropes that I like to have there. Particularly, I love a really slow burn, and this book did not have really any of a slow burn, and I didn't love the love interest. You're gonna love a romance book the most if you're in love with the love interest and you self-project onto the main character, and I struggled to do that as much here. Although I am a fanfiction writer and a cosplayer. It just wasn't for me, but I can see a lot of people loving this book. Next we have a reread, Shadow and Bone. I reread this trilogy before the series came out on Netflix. I've never been a massive fan of the first book, still am not. I think I like it even less now because I just, as a person, have really grown out of YA, but obviously some people still love it, and it sets up a much better story in a really cool world. This is just the worst book in that universe, I think. Then we have The Lost Princess by Connie Glynn. I like this series. It's a lot of like serotonin, it's very lighthearted, and I found it very fun to read when I was in a really dark place after heartbreak. But this particular one in the series just was not my favorite, and found it kind of difficult to get through, and was a bit of a letdown from just the happy escapism of the other books. Then in terms of graphic novels, I reread Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy because I finally bought the trade paperback for it. I did read the story as single issues when it was a miniseries being published, and I didn't like it then, and I didn't really like it now, although I did want to own it just because Harley Ivy is part of my personality. I hated the ending of this then, and I kind of really don't like the characterization of Harley or Ivy here, and that hasn't changed. And then we also have Wonder Woman the True Amazon. I loved the artwork in this, but I didn't love the writing or the narrative really. Now on to It's Just Alright. Starting off, we have Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. I reread the Hunger Games trilogy this year. I've never been the biggest fan of Mockingjay. It was better than I remembered it being, but it's still a relatively weak ending to a really, really solid trilogy in my opinion. It's alright, it's not bad, I have fun reading it. It's just a bit of a letdown, I think. Then we have Thrawn, Ascendancy, Chaos Rising. Yes, that's the title. I did really enjoy this book. I just think I had higher expectations because I really like most Thrawn stuff, and this wasn't my favorite. So that was just my own personal expectations. I would still recommend this because I did have fun with it. It just wasn't exactly what I wanted. Also in the It's Just Alright here, we have Undercover Princess and Princess in Practice. Again, I really do have fun with these books. They are just nice little lighthearted serotonin-filled things, and they were very nice to read when I was in a really dark spot and I just needed something lighthearted. I needed something very escapist. I needed something middle grade too, because I just was so depressed and I was reading a lot of books that were still quite existential, and I just couldn't wrap my head around hope even existing in the world, and these were very fun to get out of. I really related to the main character. I'm a Disney adult. I've always really attached myself to Rapunzel as a coping mechanism, and I'm someone who, I have glasses and I have wavy blonde hair and all of that, and so I really attached myself to the main character. I'm also queer, so that was very fun, and we do just love gay princesses with very clear Disney influences. They were fun. They're not like the best things I think I've read, but I had fun with them and they were what I needed at the time. Then we also have Cruella, Hello Cruel Heart. I know what this title is. I had fun with this. It's, you know, it's a mid-quel book, which is, it's gonna be whatever it is. I quite like reading Disney novels, so I was excited for it, and I actually really loved the Cruella film. So I was really excited to read this, and you know, it's a mid-quel, so you can't really have anything with major stakes, and it doesn't necessarily even feel like it's canon, but it's a bit of fun, I guess. Then we have Aristotle and Dante discover the dive into the waters of the world. I did really enjoy this, but a lot of it felt a bit like the author didn't really want to be writing this book. There was a lot of times where it felt like nothing was happening for a long period of time, and while I will always love the way that this author writes, I think everything he writes is beautiful and poetic and gorgeous, it just didn't really feel necessary. So I loved it, but I also didn't need it to exist, I guess, which is why it's in this tier. Then we have Ruin and Rising. I like Ruin and Rising. I think the Shadow and Bone trilogy is still the weakest story within this universe, like just that trilogy. It's fine. It's alright. You have fun with it. That's what I'll say. I prefer it to Shadow and Bone. Then we also have The Lost Hero. I think I'm a little bit hard on this book. I think maybe it could have gone up a tier, but it's just not my personal favorite. I don't think it's one of Rick's best works. It is better than I remembered it being. I remembered really disliking this for a lot of this book, and I definitely still really enjoy reading it. It's still not my favorite. Speaking of Heroes of Olympus, Blood of Olympus is here. I enjoy it, but I also really don't think Blood of Olympus is very good, so... The last novel in this tier is The Hating Game. I can see why people like this. I really didn't. It was fine. I just didn't really care about the dynamic between the two. I didn't really like Lucy as a character, which really hurt the story, I think. I found her a little annoying. I'm not really an enemies to lovers person. I think I like it. Like, if it's done well, I enjoy it, but I really didn't think it was done well here. Also, at no point was there like any actual stakes. At no point did I actually feel like either of them hated each other. If I'm reading an enemies to lovers story, I want them to be ready to murder each other, and like obviously that wasn't the case here. I enjoyed it once we kind of got to the wedding onwards, but I was really struggling to care about anything before the wedding. As for graphic novels in this tier, we have Miles Morales, The Great Responsibility. I will praise these like tiny little Marvel trade paperbacks aimed at young people till the end of my days. I've been rereading a lot of Miles stories through these, which is very fun because I read some like single issue Miles stuff, but I always missed ones because I used to not live anywhere near a comic store, and so I could only go in every few months, and I would just miss out on issues of a lot of my favorite stories. To refresh my mind on Miles and to read stories that I missed is really cool. This isn't my favorite like little Miles paperback, but I love his character and I'll recommend it to anyone. I do just like, I love Miles, but some of the story arcs in this collection weren't my faves, I guess. Then we have The Legend of Wonder Woman Origins. I had a lot of fun with this, but it's not like my favorite Wonder Woman story that I've ever read. It's decent. I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to start reading Diana stuff. Then we have Batman White Knight Presents Harley Quinn. I enjoyed this. I was a little let down by it. I really liked Batman White Knight, and obviously Harley is my favorite character in all of DC and one of my favorite characters ever. So I had really high expectations, and I didn't feel like it completely met them, but I definitely had fun, and I would still probably recommend this. I don't really dislike much Black Label stuff, so I'd still recommend it. Then we have Ghost Spider Volume 1, Dog Days Are Over. Ghost Spider is not my favorite Earth 65 Gwen story, but I still enjoy it just because I love Gwen so much as a character and I love this world, and getting to see her go to college on Earth 616 and seeing Peter and stuff. I really love all that, and I think we could go a little bit further with that. I enjoy like the college life kind of aspects of these stories more than anything else, but you know, I still had fun with it. Also, can we talk about how Miles is on the cover of this? Yeah, Miles is like not in this. Then we have Harley and Ivy Meet Betty and Veronica. I have been trying to find this in comic book stores for fucking years. I finally found it like the week before Christmas, like just recently. But because I've been waiting years to read this, I think I had talked it up in my head of like, just because I loved the concept, and I was like slightly let down, but it was still fun. I think I just, because I'd been waiting so long to read it, had created this idea of what I wanted it to be in my head, and it wasn't. It leans more into the Archie comic side of things than like the Harley Quinn. I was more excited to see Betty and Veronica dealing with Gotham stuff than I was to see Harley and Ivy in, you know, Riverdale, and I feel like it leaned that way. But, you know, it's a bit of fun. I like that this exists. Then we also have Black Cat Volume 1 Grand Theft Marvel. I love Felicia. I actually don't know if it's really why I've put them here. I was quite harsh with my judging system, honestly, because I had a lot of fun with this. It's not my favorite Black Cat story, and it's not my favorite of even like the paperbacks for her. So I guess that's why it's here. But I also really loved this and really recommend it. So I'm a bit confused with my own decisions, but that's fine. I also have Black Cat Volume 4 Queen in Black here, which this makes more sense to me because while I did still enjoy this was my like least favorite Black Cat story, this one makes more sense. Still a lot of fun. Really recommend the Black Cat comics to anyone interested in Felicia's character, especially now that her character is kind of blowing up on TikTok a little bit, and I do have the feminine urge to gatekeep her a little bit because I've been fighting in the trenches for her for years. If you're interested in a character, you can read up. She's also my next cosplay, so if anyone wants to read up before a cosplayer, that's cool too. All right, now we're into spectacular show-stopping. Nope, show-stopping spectacular is what I called it. These are things that I just absolutely fucking loved with my whole heart, like had like no problems with, really, really, really loved, cannot recommend enough. That's what this is. To begin, we have Star Wars Master and Apprentice. This is my favorite Star Wars novel that I've read in a hot minute. I love it so much. I've never been someone who loves Qui-Gon Jinn. I've never really understood the hype. He is the best part of the Phantom Menace, but I fucking hate the Phantom Menace. And I just never really understood the fascination with his character, although I do love Obi-Wan. I get it now. This novel made me love Qui-Gon Jinn so much. Getting to see the dynamic between him and Obi-Wan and really, really delving into just like Obi-Wan as a Padawan. I loved it so much. I cannot recommend this enough. If you want to read a Star Wars novel, oh my goodness, I cannot recommend Master and Apprentice anywhere near enough. I loved this. Another Star Wars novel that I really, really loved, which you can also listen to as like an audio drama, Dooku Jedi Lost. Oh my fucking god, I loved this. It just delves so beautifully into the toxicity of the Jedi Order and the problems of that and how they treat, you know, the Jedi and their Padawans, and how it really like, it's so easy. And I understand completely why you know, Jedis would turn to the dark side and be so intrigued by that. I loved it. I loved just getting to see a lot of Ventress because I love Clone Wars, and like, oh, I loved this too. I really, really recommend this, whether you want to listen to it or read it. Then we have another reread, Sun and Neptune, 10 out of 10. You watch my reading vlogs if you really want to hear me talk about these. I love the Sun and Neptune. Another reread, Reflection, which is still one of my favorite Twisted Tale stories. I was in a massive reading slump earlier in the year, and reading like little Disney books generally helps me get out of them, so I reread this. And it did help me get out of my reading slump for that time being, and then I lasted 2 weeks and fell back into one, but it's fine. If you want to read a Disney Twisted Tales book, I really, really recommend Reflection. It's basically about Mulan going down into the underworld to try and save Shang, and it's great. Then we have It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. My lovely friend Tyler gifted this book to me for my birthday, and I cried like a fucking baby reading it. It hit very close to home as someone who tends to kind of like be attracted to abuse because of the way that I grew up and has a lot of generational trauma. This book hit so close to home and so hard, and I was just sobbing through a good portion of it. Then again, speaking of my Hunger Games reread, The Hunger Games and Catching Fire are also in this tier. Ignore that they're different covers because I bought these books when I was like 10 and I didn't care about covers at the time. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. I care now, and it bothers me now, but it's fine. I still love this trilogy. It was the first time I'd read it since I was 14. The political themes hit so much more now as an adult living in this climate. I first read these books when I was 10 and then reread at 14 and then again at 19, and I feel like I have a much stronger grasp on the political climate and the political commentary and societal commentaries that these novels make. Then we have After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was the first time I've ever read this, but Taylor Jenkins Reid is like my favorite author, or one of my favorite authors ever, and this book did not disappoint. I'm obsessed with the way that Taylor writes, and just every character that she creates, every female character that she creates, I always really strongly identify with, and this was really beautiful. I read it kind of like during a heartbreak, and I got really emotional during it, and it was beautiful, and I love it, and I recommend everything that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes, but I loved this. I also reread Red, White and Royal Blue because I needed to try and remember that love exists after said heartbreak. It really defined my year a little bit. This is just pure serotonin. You can never go wrong with this. It's just the cutest thing ever, and I'm very picky with romance books, but this is one that I really love and still do. Hi, editing Ashlee here. I wasn't gonna bring this up originally because it's all alleged and I don't want to like spread rumors, but I want to bring it up because I think it's funny, and you know, I just want to share this information. But I was gonna say the reason why I like Red, White and Royal Blue so much is when I read a romance, I want it to read like fan fiction, and Red, White and Royal Blue does read like fan fiction, which is because it allegedly started off as a fan fiction by Andrew Garfield and Jesse Eisenberg. So then we have another Twisted Tales, Go the Distance. This immediately became one of my favorites because it's, you know, it's Megara going out on a Greek quest. It's essentially a Percy Jackson book with Megara as the main character. And I love that so much. Like, if you know me, you will understand why that's such high praise from me. Then we have my favorite from that trilogy, Siege and Storm. This book is why I love Shadow and Bone and why I still like care about that franchise. Like, this book is it for me. I fucking love Siege and Storm so much that, like, yeah, you get through Shadow and Bone to get to this, and then Malibu Rising is still good, but it's kind of a step down. But like, oh my god, this book. Then I also did reading vlogs for this reread, but wave it, son. I love how much this delves into Simon's trauma and just like the repercussions of having been the chosen one and then not being the chosen one anymore. Really love it. Really, 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 really love it. Mwah. We also have Anyway the Wind Blows, because I really liked this and I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful ending to the trilogy. Then we have one of my favorite new books of the year, One Last Stop. I was so excited for this because I love Red, White, and Royal Blue so much and have for years. I was so fucking excited to have a Sapphic book. I went into this completely blind, which I'm glad that I did. I don't want to spoil anything because the plot was not what I was expecting, but it was so much better than what I was expecting. I loved the love story in this and everything about it. I was so fascinated by, and I'm obsessed with like every character who appears and just the vibes of this. I feel like if Welcome to New York by Taylor Swift was a book, it would be like this. And New Romantics, if you combined the vibes of them and made them a book, it is One Last Stop. If I don't want to spoil anything, go in blind if you can. It's so brilliant. Also on this tier, we have Demi Files and Demi Diaries. I love these. They're a fun little read all the time. And some short stories I don't love as much, but I love their existence. And, you know, they have short stories that I absolutely love. This has Percy Jackson and the Bronze Dragon. This has the Quest for Hermes one that I forget the name of, but I love them deeply. Then we have my favorite Twisted Tale that came out this year. What Once Was Mine. I was obviously very excited about this because Tangled is my whole personality. I was a little cautious because I love Tangled so much that I was nervous about how we're going to do a Twisted Tale, but I fucking loved this. There is a Eugene quote from this that I think about every fucking day of my life. This also, because it's a novel, was a little bit triggering for me because it delves into Rapunzel coming to terms with Gothel, obviously playing the role that she played in her life and not being a true mother and being an abuser essentially, and having that internal conflict that hits so close to home for me was so relatable. And it was written in such a real, grounded, relatable way in my opinion, and that was a real highlight from this for me too. This is embarrassingly my last read of the year because I just decided like a week ago that I wanted to reread Twilight, but we have Twilight here. And another reread because I wanted to replay Spider-Man PS4 after No Way Home, and I wanted to reread the prequel novel before I started playing the game again. We have Spider-Man Hostile Takeover. It's really good. If you like the PS4 game, it's a prequel novel to it. It's really good. It talks a lot about Echo. She's one of the main characters here, which we love to see. It just really expands the world in a way that feels very relatable and true, and you talk a lot more about Kingpin and the lead up to arresting Fisk in the beginning of the game, and it's great and I love it very much. On to graphic novels, we have Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey Hunt for Harley. I just like Harley Quinn stories a lot. This isn't like the best Harley story ever, but it was the first Harley thing that I'd read in a while, especially with like Amanda and Jimmy, which like felt nostalgic for me in a weird way. I really do like DC Black Label stuff, and yeah, it was the first Harley story I'd read in a little bit, and I really enjoyed it, and I still think it's good. Then I reread, because I bought the trade paperback, Scarlet Witch: The Complete Collection. This was the first like comic that or even graphic novel that I'd bought in a while. I went out, took myself to a comic book store. I was really, really down and depressed. It was February. It was right after I moved out. Really, really down, really sad and depressed, and was going through heartbreak, but it was a very weird, very ongoing situation for a long time. And I was really, really not coping well with it. And WandaVision was a massive coping mechanism of mine. Just getting so in love with WandaVision, I just decided to take myself to a comic book store one day when I was out getting coffee, and this was in stock. And I had read before, I had read as it was single issues, but it was one of the first non-Spider-Man stories I'd ever read back in the day. It felt like this full circle moment of when I used to be so terrified of walking into comic book stores, and I would just shyly buy my like Harley Quinn and Spider-Gwen and, you know, Scarlet Witch stuff, like tap back into my 14-year-old self that I needed at the time. So bought this, reread it, 10 out of 10, still love it as a Wanda stan. I really, really enjoy this series, and I recommend to anyone who cares about Wanda. Then we have Miles Morales Spider-Man. I prefer this Miles story to the other one, I guess, but my baby. We also have Miles Morales Shockwaves, which is a really cute, very short, very cheap graphic novel. Like, I really enjoyed this one too. We also had a reread of Vote Loki, because before the Loki series came out, I wanted to reread this because obviously we'd seen President Loki in promotional stuff. Thought it would play more of a role in the series than it did, but I still really fuck with this. I just think it's very funny. We also have Web of Black Widow, which I got for like $4 when Zing was having a sale, which we stand. I really loved this. This is one of my favorite Black Widow stories that I've read recently. So 10 out of 10. I also read Black Widow Finely Woven Thread. I would like to try and track down the rest of the paperbacks for this series. I really enjoyed it. We also have Spider-Man Spider-Gwen. I just felt like rereading this at some point in the year. I can't remember why specifically. I think I was like getting into discourse about like the fact that I don't really ship Miles and Gwen in the comics. Again, don't really ship them, but I also do love the dynamic between them, and I think this is like a fucking fantastic crossover. I also just remembered Daughter of the Deep. What the fuck is Rick's new book called? That's also in this tier. I did a reading blog for that as well, but I read that on my Kindle, so I forgot, but that's also in this tier. Then we have Black Cat Volume 2 on the run. Really loved this. Black Cat Volume 3 All Dressed Up is also here. This is probably my favorite. I fuck with both of these very much. They're my favorite, like, Felicia moment. Also have a recent read, Mighty Nine Origins, Jester Lavore. Really loved this. Jester is my favorite Mighty Nine character, so I just had a lot of fun with it. The art was beautiful, and it's just really fun and nice to read. Joker Harley is also here, Criminal Sanity. Didn't really know what to expect going into this. Fucking loved it. The art for Harley is so goddamn hot. I was so invested and on board with everything about this. It gave me real Hannibal vibes, which is one of my favorite shows. Bit of a warning for like gore if you're not into that. There's some graphic imagery, but oh my fucking god, it's such a solid mystery and such a great like psychological kind of story. I cannot recommend this enough. Absolutely brilliant. Now on to the top tier. Changed the trajectory of my life forever. These are books that genuinely or stories that I think about every single day. I do not have words for how fantastic they are. I carry them with me. I was completely blown away by them. I didn't just love them, they like changed my life. First up, again, something before I forget to mention it, I read on my Kindle because I've never found the actual paperback for this in person ever. If anyone knows where to find one that's not like $300, please hit me up because it's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories ever. But we have Spider-Man Blue. It's still one of the most beautiful things I've ever read and one of my favorite Spider-Man stories. Moving on, Mark of Athena and House of Hades. They're rereads, but they still count to be in this tier. I don't care. Another reread, we also have Carry On. This is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. Like, I love the sequels, but nothing tops just Carry On. I really loved it. I really fucking love this book. Then we have a book that actually actively, like on another level, changed my life, Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. This is my absolute favorite thing I read all year. Didn't know exactly what I was in for going in, and I read it before my like actual heartbreak, but when my relationship was having a lot of problems. It was just so moving and so beautiful. I read it in a day and I think about it multiple times a day, and I read it in January. So moving, so beautiful. It's a relationship told in reverse. So it opens with the breakup and it ends with them meeting, and I cannot recommend it enough. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my entire life. On another note, we have The Love Hypothesis. This is worth the hype. It's one of the most fun romance things I've ever read. It's just free serotonin. It's not anything groundbreaking. It used to be a fan fiction and it reads like a fan fiction, which is honestly the biggest praise I can give something. That's what I want a romance book to feel like, is I want it to read like a fan fiction to me. Oh my god, I loved this book. This book made me think Adam Driver is attractive. It's fake dating, it's slow burn, it's miscommunication, it's everything I want. We also have Malibu Rising, where Taylor Jenkins Reid. I just fucking loved this. You cannot go wrong with Taylor Jenkins Reid in my opinion. I'm such a huge fan of hers. I also read Normal People for the first time this year and absolutely loved it. It really, really, really deeply affected me. I'm so late to this train that I feel like everyone has already read this, but I need to read everything else Sally Rooney has written. I need to read her new book and I need to read Conversations with Friends. It was so gorgeous. I also reread the Princess Diaries this year. After said heartbreak, I got very embarrassed about the circumstances of that love and heartbreak for me. I remembered that Carrie had gone through a heartbreak at my age. I was 19 with someone older, where like, you know, we kind of knew better, I guess, going in. I needed to feel like one of the women who I look up to most in my life. I needed to be reminded of that she went through something similar, and she was so brave to just share that story. Granted, much later in life, but she still shared that, and I needed to feel connected to that. So I reread it, cried like a baby. I also read Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This was one of my favorite movies as a kid, and I never read it. It was a birthday gift from my mum because she knew how much I loved the film as a child. I used to watch the hell out of it. I can't believe it took me this long to read it. It's one of my favorite things I've ever read in my goddamn life. I need to read more Neil Gaiman. It's not a want, it's a need. Oh my god, I loved this so much. I don't know why it took me so long to read it, but I cannot recommend it enough if you like fantasy. I also reread my favorite book of all time this year, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Everyone knows how I feel about this book. I've never been so moved by a book before or again in my life. Out of Love kind of comes close, but still, nothing will ever beat this baby. As like a bisexual woman who wants to be an actress, who just really relates to Evelyn as a human being. There is just something about this book. I don't think I've ever been this moved by a novel before, and I don't know if I ever will be again. So yeah, I reread this because it's just good for my soul to reread this every now and then. Now onto graphic novel. I also reread this to hurt my own feelings. Death of the Stacys. Hadn't read it in a hot minute. I had a lot of Gwen and Peter feelings after No Way Home, and so I reread it, cried a lot. It's still so gorgeous though, and I really love old Spider-Man comics. I know that some people, it's not really their bag. I really like old Spider-Man comics. I really love like 70s and 80s Spider-Man stories, and it's so beautiful. The actual moments where Peter loses Gwen is so moving to me. Next up, we have Tom King's The Vision. This is one of my favorite comics that I've ever read in my goddamn life. I didn't read these when they were actually coming out as single issues, because while I do really like Tom King and, you know, have heard wonderful things about them and heard really good things about this, I just wasn't that interested in the Vision as a character in the comics outside of his relationship to Wanda. I have always really enjoyed the Vision in the MCU, but I honestly found him pretty boring in the comics, so I just wasn't that intrigued with it. And I heard good things, but it just wasn't a character I was interested in, so I let it slide, let it pass, and I didn't think about it for a while. And then WandaVision started, and everyone started talking about it again, saying that WandaVision was being like directly influenced from this, and it was going to be important in theorizing about WandaVision. So I tracked it down, and it was sold out everywhere because of WandaVision, but I tracked it down, and it is one of the most incredible things that I've ever read. It's so twisted, and I love stuff like that. I love when comics get really fucked up, and it's just this really twisted representation of suburbia, synthezoids trying to live in suburbia and get along with humans, but you know, so many people die, and it's like genuinely really fucked up, and I love it so much. It also has my favorite comic panel, like not actually my favorite comic panel ever, but like one of my favorite comic panels ever that I think about every day, which is just Vision sitting in a chair going, Wanda, and her turning around being like, you're a damn toaster. I think about it daily. And speaking of things I read for the first time because of WandaVision, we have Young Avengers: The Children's Crusade. I'd actually never read this before. I'd read normal main run Young Avengers stuff. I'd never read Children's Crusade. I don't really know why. I think I just never owned it. But one of my local comic book stores, it's really cute. It has a little section where it'll be like upcoming MCU projects, and it'll have a bunch of comics that they think are going to be important in it. And they had this in the WandaVision section, and I was like, oh shit, I don't think I've read that. I love Young Avengers. I was vaguely aware of what happened in it, just had never read it, and like everything that I read with the Young Avengers, it immediately became one of my favorite things ever. I really love Young Avengers stuff, and obviously having Wanda be so important here was just so exciting to me. Obviously had like heard about everything with her and Dr. Doom, but I never actually read it, so it was really cool to finally read it and be like, oh yeah, this is where that happens. And one that I reread like after 1 or 2 episodes of WandaVision, because I was like, this will be important. House of M. This is still one of my favorite comics ever. I feel like this is pretty divisive in terms of comic book fans. I really love House of M. I think it's a really intriguing story. I really like the story for Wanda, and the opening pages of this, like, I think about almost every day of my life. They're some of my favorite things, not even just in comic history, but ever. I think they're so haunting and so beautiful. If anyone ever wants to like make a House of M fan film and cast me as Wanda so I can like act out these opening pages, because I think about them like constantly. They're everything to me. I loved it as much rereading it as I did when I first read it a couple years back. And then another reread because of MCU projects, we have Matt Fraction and David Ayer, I think is how you pronounce the name, but Hawkeye. I read this on my Kindle initially. I found it in store in a hardback too, but I like to own things, and because I prefer reading physical things. So anytime I have a story that I like, that I think I want to reread, I want to own it physically. I like having things to put on my bookshelves. I really like physical objects. It's why I like vinyl albums and like Polaroid pictures and just picture frames in general. I like physical things I can hold. Immediately bought it, and it was right after the first episode of Hawkeye came out, so I really wanted to reread it anyway. So I did, and it's just as good as I remember. I really like it. I'm actually not that big a fan of Matt Fraction usually. I'm a little bit blinded by how much I love just Kate as a character, Clint in the comics as a character, and David Ayer's art, because I love it. But I still think this is really solid. I think this is a really solid series, especially like the first 5 issues, like the My Life as a Weapon kind of arc, I think are the peak. It's a good old time, and as a Kate Bishop stan and as a comic Clint Barton stan, it's a nice little read. And last but not least, something else that I reread because I read it as single issues and then wanted to reread as I bought a physical book copy, Harleen, which I'll be honest, with these like DC Black Labels, because this is the only one that I like kind of bought as it came out, they're already basically like very thin paperback books, so I didn't really need to buy this, but when it came out and I saw it in a comic store, I bought it anyway in like February of this year. This is still one of my favorite comic stories ever. It's one of my favorite Harley stories for sure. Every time anyone asks me for DC recommendations or Harley specific recommendations, this is the first thing that I give them. I think it's probably my favorite representation of her backstory besides Batman the Animated Series, and obviously this is a much more grown-up kind of version of it. I actually understand why she would fall in love with the Joker in this, because he's fucking hot. It's haunting, it's beautiful, it's a fantastic just narrative about exactly how she was seduced into insanity and manipulated into insanity. It just portrays that journey and the mind games that the Joker plays with her. It's done so fucking well. I cannot recommend this enough if you were interested in Harley as a character. And that is it. That is every book that I read or graphic novel that I read in 2021 ranked and tier listed for you all. I hope some people maybe get some recommendations out of this if they want them. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching. Maybe if you read any books that you really loved this year and have some recommendations, throw them in the comments. I hope you have a wonderful 2022. I'm so sorry. But I hope you have a wonderful year. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. My socials are linked below, or support me on Patreon if you want to. That would be cool. If not, I love you and I'll see you very soon. Mwah.